What's happening, people? goukigod here. In this video I'm going to be talking about Paladins and if I think it's a decent game, and also how it differs from Overwatch. Now obviously it's been copying a lot of flack for being a shameless ripoff, or lots of people thinking it's a shameless ripoff of Overwatch, so I'm going to be talking about that as well. Now my impressions of the game are based on the recent closed beta or closed alpha that was held. It actually wasn't really clear which one it was. The language was a little bit mixed. In the email that I got, it said that it was a closed alpha, and it also said that it was a beta, but in the game it clearly said that it was a beta, but who knows what was going on there. Now the beta, despite being closed, wasn't too difficult to get into. There was actually an online form that was publicly available to everybody, which I also tweeted about a little while back, which kind of makes you wonder why it wasn't just open to everyone. But having said that, there were quite a few bugs which I saw, which I'll discuss in a little bit more detail later on, and maybe that's why they decided to keep it closed. Now in terms of length, it was a pretty substantial test. It ran for about a week, or maybe a bit longer than a week I think, which is pretty huge, as most of the betas that I've played recently have only run for about a couple of days at most. And in a couple of instances that meant that I missed them entirely. I think if you don't have anything else on, then a couple of days is plenty of time, but for me that's pretty rare, so having a beta run for over a week is absolutely perfect. So firstly, before I talk about my thoughts on the game, let's address the elephant in the room. The fact that so much of Paladins feels incredibly similar, if not directly lifted from Overwatch. You've probably already checked out Donkey's video, which rips into it pretty hard, but there's a ton of other videos also on YouTube claiming that it's an Overwatch clone. It's actually pretty interesting though when you dig into the development history and the backstory of the game. There's even evidence to suggest that many of the design decisions were made before Overwatch's public release. And according to Todd Harris, who is one of the main representatives at Hi-Rez Studios, there are some clear examples like the loot chest that were shown in pre-alpha long before Overwatch was publicly shown that prove it's not a clone. There's even a couple of YouTube videos which back up these claims, which I'll link below, that show the game in various stages of early development. There are a couple of examples that appear to predate Overwatch, like Eevee's ice block move, but most of it isn't exactly conclusive proof that it was created first. I think unfortunately, even if Paladins did come first, it will probably always be seen as a ripoff because of how similar some of the assets are. I mean, take a look at Barak. He's probably one of the most obvious examples because he's so similar to Torbjorn from Overwatch, from his appearance to the voice and even down to tiny little details. But the whole game feels like it borrows heavily from Overwatch, from the visual presentation to the game design to the music. Even the game's light-hearted cartoony tone could all easily fit into the Overwatch universe. And it's a shame because it's actually kind of fun. The controls for the most part are tight, the matches are fast paced, and a lot of the games that I played were pretty close and evenly matched. All the champions that I played were pretty fun too. In particular, I like Grovo, who looks a bit like an Ent from the Lord of the Rings. He's one of the more original characters both in appearance and abilities. His ultimate, or whatever they're called in Paladins, makes him skip around and heal his team, and the animation is pretty damn funny. I also like Ruckus. He's essentially a D.Va clone with some similarities to Zarya from Overwatch. Now he's a tank character, or what's called a frontline character in Paladins, and I had some pretty crazy big games with him, racking up a ton of kills. I'm not sure what the deal was, but pretty much every game that I played, I was the top scoring player. Now that's not me gloating or bragging either, that's me genuinely being confused about the general lack of skill that other players had. I think I went 48-3 in my first game, and I think all but maybe one or two other games that I played, I was easily the biggest point scorer and slayer on the team. Now normally in first person shooters I can hold my own, but I'm rarely the best player consistently. So let's talk about the biggest point of difference between Paladins and Overwatch, which is the card system. Now cards are essentially modifiers which you can earn in loot chests, or you can buy them to create your own custom decks. Each character starts off with a default deck, but you can create up to 6 per champion. They do add a bit of variety to the gameplay, but they don't dramatically change how each character is played. I guess the easiest way to describe them is that they're kind of like Call of Duty's perks. They essentially modify certain traits, like increasing the radius of certain specific abilities, or they increase the speed at which you heal. They're all completely passive too, meaning that you don't need to press a button to activate them. I didn't spend an awful lot of time messing around with the custom decks because unless you earn them in loot chests, you have to buy them, and I was trying to save my gold for some of the stupid skins. The other type of cards is burn cards, which are temporary modifiers that you purchase during the match. You purchase them using credits that are earned by playing the objective or getting kills. Now these can be used to buff things like the amount of damage that you deal or reduce the amount of damage that you take, but unlike the cards in your deck, they are the same for every champion and can't be customized. Honestly, I thought they were a little bit overpowered. I don't really agree that the top performing players should be able to make themselves harder to kill or be able to deal more damage. It just doesn't seem fair. I do like how you can modify how offensive or defensive your champion is on the fly depending on the situation. So for example, if your team is getting absolutely pummeled, you can boost your ability to heal, or if your team needs help pushing, you can decrease the cooldowns on your abilities. It's a good idea, but I think it needs balancing because I found that when I was racking up heaps of kills that I could then further boost my damage output while also getting a health regen every time I got a kill. It's a pretty ridiculous combination that makes strong players even more difficult to deal with. Now there were two modes in the beta, Siege and Payload, which are again very similar to the modes found in Overwatch. I don't think they work as well in Paladins though because of how quickly you can get back into the fight after respawning. So to explain, everybody gets a horse to ride back into the battle with because horses are cool. It's an interesting idea though to get you back into the action quickly, but ultimately I thought it made it really hard to push. Even if your team manages to wipe out the enemy team, you only have a small window of opportunity to make progress because of how fast the enemy team can get back on the objective. Because of this, most games seem to bottleneck the closer that they get to the objective because the enemy team would just respawn, jump on a horse and be back in the action in no time. I certainly think this element could use some fine tuning, like maybe a limit on the number of horses available per round, or perhaps you can't use a horse beyond a certain point in the map. I think this would add some much needed strategy and team play into the otherwise chaotic matches. Now being a free-to-play game, there are a few things hidden behind a paywall, and there are gameplay modifying items available with real-world money such as more powerful cards. Unfortunately, this does set up a pay-to-win scenario, so it'll be interesting to see how this affects the game long term. There aren't any pay-to-win weapons or abilities as far as I know, but you can unlock just about anything with real-world money. Lots of items require a combination of gold and crystals to purchase them, and some items can only be purchased with crystals. Seeing as crystals can only really be earned in very small amounts by logging in consistently or referring a friend, you'll need to spend real-world money to get them. Now here's the kicker, most items require upwards of 200 crystals, and at $5 for 200 crystals, unlocking those sexy shades that you've been eyeing starts to get pretty expensive. Now being the beta, the prices on these crystals could totally just be a placeholder, so hopefully they're not this expensive when the game finally ships. Now despite the fact that you can spend real world money on unlocking a bunch of stuff including the gameplay modifying cards, you don't need to spend money to unlock them, you can unlock them through regular play. And in my short time with the beta I had enough gold to buy some decent modifiers. So I think with enough playtime it would be possible to earn what you want without actually having to pay for it. So overall, I did enjoy my time with Paladins. I do think that the game overall needs a lot of polish in a lot of areas. The card system definitely has the potential to be horribly overpowered, and there were a ton of visual and audio bugs, and the game crashed quite a few times for me too. Controls for the most part were good, but there were some elements that just didn't work, like the horses in particular were really stiff, so I think in general there's a lot of work that can still be done. On the plus side, it looks nice enough, and despite all the issues that I had with it, it is still quite a lot of fun. I think where Paladins fits in is it's going to be a good free-to-play alternative to Overwatch. And maybe that's their angle and why they've made it so similar, and if that's the case, that's really clever. As an Overwatch player though, with almost 100 hours sunk into the game, it's pretty unlikely that I'll be swayed, but it does make for a compelling proposition for anyone who has yet to buy Overwatch. It certainly could be a good entry point for Overwatch as well. Seeing as Paladins is completely free, you could download it, give it a few hours worth of playtime to see if you like the style of gameplay, and if you want to migrate over to Overwatch because that's where your friends are or you just think that's a more attractive game, then you could do so. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts were if you got to play the game, how you felt it compared to Overwatch, if you think it's better, if you think it's an awful ripoff, or if you think their strategy of making the game as similar to Overwatch as possible is actually real so that they can sway people who are sitting on the fence about buying Overwatch. Like I said, I'm going to be sticking with Overwatch. I've sunk too many hours into that game to switch over to something that's very similar. But that's all I've got for you in this video. I want to thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'm out.
Victory.